Hi, welcome to my next series on Angular 4, and in this session we'll further see some of the concepts in routing. In this video we will see route with parameters. In the previous session we have already seen how we can do routing with Angular 4 or Angular 2. So those routings were just without parameters. Right, suppose in one component I want to send some value from the main component, from the say master component to the child component. So there we require some parameters to be sent to the child component. So I have already opened my Visual Studio Code and I have already issued the command of ngserve, and my server is already started and I can already run the application that we developed in our last session. Okay, so I'll just enhance this application further. So even if you want to create from scratch, you can do so. So I'm just going to enhance the same application. So if you remember, we had this app.route where we have defined this routing for Java. Inside Java we had children component called swing and spring, and Android didn't had any children component. So today what we'll do, we'll create one child component in Android, and that child component will display the parameter, display the value depending on what parameter has been passed from the master component, the main component. Okay, so first step will be, let us create one component, extra component, say new file, and this file I call it as say Android. So this will decide what kind of ID we will be using for Android. So .id dot say Eclipse, say they are option for choosing either of the ID, Eclipse or Android Studio. So this I say Eclipse dot okay, sorry, let's not do it this way, let's make it dynamic. Let's take a single component only to make it even more simple. So I'll just rename it. Okay, so I'll say id dot component, and my same component will display whether Eclipse is chosen or the user has chosen Android Studio. Okay, so I've just developed this component. So before that, let me come to main Android component.ts, and here I will just take a router link, anchor tag with router link, which actually translates into an ahref attribute after it is compiled. So router link equals, then we can take some link in an array, or directly also we can write it, but there's an advantage if you take it within an array. You can pass parameters, that's the main advantage. And say I write type. Okay, type slash say colon ID name. So I'll just come to it. What do you mean by colon ID name? And over here I'll just close this anchor tag. So ID name, this is the first parameter. Okay, and here we'll give the parameter as say Eclipse. Okay, ID name and Eclipse, or let us make it, we'll just write type. Okay, type Eclipse. Okay, let's not give the value over here. Here type will be say Android Studio. So these are the two different IDs, both are based on Eclipse, but just for the sake of having a simple program, we consider it as different ID. So Android Studio and Eclipse. Okay, fine. So we have got here type, the value of type will be Eclipse and value of type will be Android Studio. Okay, then after that we give a break tag as we, so that, or break tag, let's give it over here so that there is some break between the two links. So better we give the break tag over here, and then let us have a router outlet over here, router hyphen outlet. So why do we give router outlet? We have already seen that if you want to load some component, some child component or any component through routing, then we have to give this router outlet directive, which is present inside your router component of Angular/router. So router outlet, so this will decide the location where my called component will be, or the child component will be displayed. So this is it for the timing. Then we next step is come to app.route, and in app.route you have to give a children component for this Android, and in this Android ID component we have not done anything. So first let's do one thing. First let's come to app.route component, and over here we give a third parameter, and let's call this third parameter as children, which we have already seen in our previous session. So children will contain the child routes. So this will contain an object. So for the sake of readability, let me break it into different line, and here is my object. I'll say path colon, so the path will be say Android and type colon slash say ID name colon ID name. Sorry, I've just typed it wrong. It should be colon ID name. So this will be the name of your variable. So if it is Android/type/Eclipse, so Eclipse will be the value of this ID name. This will act like a variable. So if it is Android/type in the URL /Android Studio, then ID name will contain the value Android Studio. Okay, and which component would refer? It would refer component, the component which we created just now. So what was that component? That is android.id.component. Okay, so views dot say Android, okay, dot IDE dot component, and from here I'll just take Android. Okay, I have not given it in component name, so let me give it some component name, which is android.id.component. Okay, now we need to first declare it. Import component from Angular core. So this will import the main component. Then let's give a decorator. Component decorator we will have. Okay, so here we define a template, and let us give a backtick so that we can write a multi-line template. So here I'll write say H1 bold text Android ID selected, Android IDE selected, and then I can bind it with some variable. Let's take a variable name called IDE, say selected IDE. So we need to define this selected IDE. Okay, so we'll do it in a moment. Okay, so then we have to export class Android IDE component. Okay, and here we'll declare a variable selected ID which we have taken over here, otherwise it will throw an error. So here let us make this ID as public or private, whatever access you can give it. The selected ID colon say string. Okay, now take the name of this component and come back to app route, and here you have to give the name of that component. Okay, and here we have to give the name of this component. So what does this means? Whenever it is a child path, so within Android it will appear. So within Android, if I click on the link type whatever is the IDE name, okay, type slash IDE name. So IDE name will be variable, so if it is type slash eclipse or type slash anything, whatever is selected, it will refer to this component called Android IDE component. Okay, so this was the step 2. Now let us come to app module, because we need to inform the module that this component is being taken. So let us come to app module. So here we have to declare this. Okay, let me just remove this. This is not required. And Android ID component. Okay, this is it. Now you come back to app route. So routing configuration is done. Okay, provided our URL pattern is correct, that we need to check. So routing configuration is done, but we are not yet collecting the variable. So if you go to app route, so this will be the pattern of the route, type slash say IDE name. So if it is Android slash type slash whatever is the IDE name, okay, whatever is the IDE name, okay, so that name will be carried as a variable. That name we need to collect it. We have not yet collected this variable, but if the URL is of this pattern type slash this, that will call this component. So if you come to main Android parent component, so we see that we have got we have this defined something like this type. So the value is Eclipse. Okay, type value is Android Studio. Well, there is one typing error over here, so let's first correct it. Okay, so now I think this page should at least display. Fine, this is displaying now. Okay, so now we are almost 80% done. So the type value will come as Eclipse, and here the value will be Android Studio, the value which we have taken in the last. After type slash whatever I have taken, that value will be the value I am providing over here, this one Eclipse. So the name of this variable is, after colon, this actually acts as a variable ID selected, so we have to take a note of it, that ID selected is the name of the variable. Okay, so right now if I just refresh my application, I hope it's already refreshed, and then you come to say Android directly, so you see Eclipse and Android Studio link is there. So now if I click it, so I get that component Android ID selected, but no value is coming. Okay, so we just get that component loaded. Why? Because according to this route configuration, if you come to app.route, whenever this pattern comes, type slash something, this will be the Android ID component will be displayed. So that is what is happening now, but we are yet to read this value. So if you just check the URL out here, when I'm clicking over here, if you just check the URL below, when I'm putting my cursor over here, so you see that the pattern is Android slash type slash Eclipse. Here it is Android slash type slash Android Studio. So the last part of the variable that is coming is actually the value assigned to this ID selected. Okay, so now we need to fetch this value. So our routing is working fine, but still we have to fetch the parameter. Okay, so to fetch the parameter, we need a component called activated route. Okay, so we need a component called activated route, and that is also part of core Angular router. So if I say import from Angular slash router, okay, and then let's check for this dependency, activated route. Okay, and this activated route we need to inject it. Okay, we need to inject it as a dependency injection. How do we inject? We have to make a constructor. So in Angular, the dependency injection is done through constructor. So here in constructor you have to define it. Okay, so let me make it multi-line, so it is easy, or let me make it single line only for the time being, or if you want you can keep it multi-line for the sake of readability. So I'll say private and Say for example I take a object called say route. Let me take the name as route, the parameter. You can take any name, okay, ABC, whatever, and this is of type activated route. Okay, now this will get injected. So if I directly say this is your selected ID, if I directly say selected ID, that this dot selected ID, this is how we access our local this property variable in Angular. This dot selected ID equals say route dot snapshot dot params. So this will give the parameter object. Inside that this will come as a key, the variable which you have taken. So the variable name is selected, what was that, we have to come to route. So variable name is ID selected, so we have to take that. So let me come to this component and just give the same name. You have to give the same name. Okay, so that means if selected ID gets that value, it will display over here in the binded value. Now let's see, let's recompile the application and let's see. So I'll come to home, let us refresh this. Okay, now let's click on Android, let's click on Eclipse. So it is saying Android ID selected Eclipse, so it is taking the whatever is the URL over here. Now if I click on Android Studio, you see that it's changing to Android Studio, but here it is not coming as Android Studio. But if I just refresh this entire URL with Android Studio, then it will show me Android Studio. Okay, please ignore this spelling mistake I have made, not an issue. So this will come as Android Studio. Now what is the reason for this? So there is no issue, this is not an error actually. The reason is because I have taken, there are two ways I can take a route param. One is the snapshot, other is the observer. Now what are observers? If you are already not aware about observers, then I would suggest you that go to some tutorial of observers, or you can wait for my upcoming tutorial on observers. Then you can actually get the concept right. So a snapshot means there are two ways, as I mentioned, we can take this route as. The params comes as observer also, and it will, you can take it as a snapshot also. If you take a snapshot, it is static in the sense like this URL is not going to change after that. Like somebody clicks on Android Studio from some different link and comes over here, so it will remain like that. But from within the component, if I have to change it dynamically, if it will change over a period of time, this link, just now it is happening, then in that case we cannot take a snapshot. A snapshot for if you see it in a process perspective, performance perspective, then taking a snapshot is better. But if this URL will change over time, just like my URL will change, like if the user clicks over here within the same component, then taking a snapshot is not a good idea. Like even if I go ahead to home and I refresh it and see, instead of clicking on Eclipse, this time I'll click on Android Studio, then this will come fine. Okay, this is coming fine, but after that it will not change because I have taken it as a snapshot. It will not change. So a snapshot we need to take if it is coming from a page, and after that this URL parameter will not change. Okay, so now we see the case where URL parameter can change. Okay, so I'll just write it over here. So let me just comment this out and let me take it as an observer. So observer, we know that it will keep a track of the change. Whenever something is changing, the observer is notified. Okay, so that is basically what observer is. So we can subscribe to an observer, subscribe for the change. So if you are not yet equipped with the concept of observer, then I would suggest you go through some tutorial on observers. Okay, so for this observer, it is always a better idea that you take one variable. Let it be private because I am not binding it to any template outside. Even to bind to a template, we can take private variable, but it is always advisable to take public variable. But in terms of observer, I am not using it anywhere else other than this component itself. So let me take observer ref. Let me take it a variable as observer ref and type any. Or you can take it as a type object. Any means it can be any object. It can be string. It can be anything. So observer ref, and then I will say this dot observer ref is equal to route dot, not a snapshot this time, okay, right, route dot, we can say params dot subscribe. You know that if you already have the knowledge of observer, you know what subscribe is. You can subscribe for the changes, okay. Dot subscribe. Inside subscribe I can give a function that will be executed and it will return the value, whatever is the fetched value. So this returns the value of, this returns params only, okay. So let us take an arrow operator. I hope you are you're already knowledgeable about arrow operator. If not, then I would suggest go and learn something about arrow operator in JavaScript. That's the ECMA standard 5, from 5 onwards it has been introduced. So arrow operator means I take params, sorry, I typed it by mistake, I typed it outside. So I say params, then take this arrow operator. It is just like a function, a shortcut to write the function. And there are other advantage of writing an arrow operator, like if I take this reference, it will actually take the entire object as the reference. But without arrow operator, if I take this, just write a normal function, they will take the function, the color of that function in reference to this. So this is the advantage of arrow operator. Anyway, you can learn in detail if you go to some other tutorials on arrow operator, if you are already not knowledgeable about it. So params, so it will return the params object. So I'll say this dot, here I'll say this dot selected IDE equals params, then whatever is the property of this param, that is ID selected, okay, ID selected. So I am done. So this observer will always look for the change, even if the advantage of taking it via an observer, wrapped in an observer, is because anyway activated route is returned as an observer stream, wrapped in an observer stream. So we can always subscribe to this observer changes, okay. So I just said route.params is what I want simply, okay. So this time I'm not taking a snapshot, I'm directly taking route.params, and I'll just say subscribe, and this params parameter I'll just pass it as a parameter inside, and then selected.id will get params.this value selected. That's it, and I'm done. So now let's come back, recompile the application. Okay, let's come to home, and I think this is already refreshed, but still I'm refreshing it. Okay, now I come to Android. If I click on Eclipse, it shows me Eclipse. If I click on Android Studio, it shows me Android Studio. So if it is changing over time, then you should always, if the route params change over time, then you should take this observer approach, okay. But if it doesn't changes over time, like if you are coming directly from one component or some other view, and then staying in this view, and after that it will not change, then it is always better not to take observer, because observer will consume more space. There can be memory leak, okay, if too many observers are there, and it will takes up some process also. So from performance perspective, taking a snapshot is better in case if it is not changing, but if it is changing, then snapshot won't help, because snapshot means once it is loaded, that route, it will remain the same, it won't change after that, it is not dynamic, okay. So depending on your requirement, you can choose whether to go for a snapshot routing, or you activated route, or whether you have to go for observer activated route. So it all depends on your requirement. So we are done with this, but there is one more thing you need to do. If you leave the code like this, it will work fine, that is fine, but from a performance perspective, still this is not a good approach, because you already created an observer, so that takes up some memory. It can lead to memory leaks. So to avoid that, you have to take its life cycle. You have to implement the life cycle, that is ng on destroy. This is the life cycle of this Angular component. So in Angular 4, I can directly take ng destroy, but actually the best practice is that you write implements over here when you are declaring a class, okay. When you are declaring a class, and this you need to import also, on init, this on destroy you have to import. You can import on init also. So ng on destroy. Okay, I think I'm writing it in the wrong place actually. Let me take it out. By mistake I am writing it within the constructor. You have to write it outside the constructor but inside the class. Okay, ng on destroy. Here you have to say this dot. That is why we are storing this observer reference. Even if you don't take this, directly write this line route dot params dot subscribe. If you directly write it, it will work, but I need to store its reference. So if I store this reference, then I can always say, sorry, I have this dot observer reference dot unsubscribe. Okay, you have to unsubscribe. Even if you don't write this, your app will work fine, but there will be a memory leak. So to avoid this memory leak, you have to on destroy. This ng on destroy is this is the part of this any component life cycle. When the component is destroyed or unloaded or destroyed, then this ng on destroy method is invoked. So here you can just say unsubscribe, but if you say unsubscribe in some other part of the application, then it may be that you will lose the subscription and the changes won't be reflected. So you have to say it in ng on destroy. And even as a good practice, it is also recommended, though it will work fine in constructor, it is also recommended that you write this thing on ng on init. But even if you write over there, it's not a problem, but it is always a better practice that you write it on init. So on init, this is also a life cycle. Okay, let me delete this. So you can write it over here. So on init will get activated as soon as the application is loaded. After the application is loaded, the view is rendered. So at that point of time, this on init runs. So here you can write. So if you are writing it outside over here, so you have to refer the route by this. So just for the sake of good practice and the good approach, I have just refactored the code and it will give you the same output. The only difference is that here in this case, it is good for the performance. Okay, because it will get cleaned up, the code will get cleaned up, means the observer will get cleaned up, the object will get cleaned up whenever the component is destroyed. So fine, this was all about routing with params, and I hope you understood the concept. And if you have got any queries, then please feel free to comment, post it in as a comment, and I'll definitely try to come up with a solution. And I'd also suggest you that there are some concepts used like observers and these arrow operators. In case you have not been able to understand this concept, then please do go through any of the tutorial that is available, or you can wait for my upcoming tutorial as well. And I hope you like this video session, and thanks very much for watching, and I'll come up with more sessions on Angular 4. Thank you very much. Bye bye.